Do you feel that in a time when we are more connected than ever, we are drifting away from real human connection, especially to ourselves? I do. Hi, I'm Leticia Latino, and I want to invite you to join me and my very inspiring guests in exploring ways to reconnect to your essence, to your definite purpose, to what makes you tick. Are you ready? Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Back to Basics, Reconnecting to the Essence of You. Jason Dennen is a motivational speaker and the author of 8 Days Till Sunrise, a true story of survival, rebirth, and discovering my purpose in life. Jason is on a mission to inspire people by sharing his empowering story of how he made a full recovery after a skydiving jump went bad. And it left him literally with a broken body, in a coma, and with no hopes from the doctors to go back to his old life. Hello, Jason, and welcome to Back to Basics.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
Well, anybody that reads that paragraph and knows that sure why you wrote that book is inspired just by that. So I'm excited, although it's obviously not a great thing to go through, and it's such a tragedy, but the fact that you're making so much out of it and just helping others, in hopeless situations. So I know there's a lot to talk. I always love to learn about my guests, about, their younger years. Tell us a little bit more about, where were you raised and you as a child? And I'm also very curious, usually about the passion. What were you passionate about? Who was younger Jason like? How was younger Jason like?
Sure. So I was born and raised in New Jersey, lived there until I was about 26. My parents are educators. So dad's a middle school teacher, a retired middle school teacher now. And my mom's taught the young grades first through fourth, and kind of an East Coast upbringing. I had 4 other siblings, so pretty big family. I was the second oldest. Went to college in New Jersey. Passionate as a young kid, baseball, sports, things like that. And then I finished college, worked a couple of years, and I was like, man, I need to find something more open space, because growing up in New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the country, and not a lot of open space. And I said, man, I need to explore something new. And if I don't like it, I can always come back. But I decided to move to Colorado. At the time, nice. I was racing triathlons, and you would read about Colorado and triathlons in every single magazine, and that was the place to train and be. And at the time, Denver was the second fastest growing city job-wise. So I quit my job in New Jersey after about 3 years of working there after college, and decided to move to Colorado, not knowing anyone, and seeing if it was for me. And so I've been out here for 22 years, and it's been the best decision I ever made.
Well, funny, because that's usually my back to basic story, right? It's like, well, I pursue a career, I like my job, but then I move just for no reason, because so many of us get stuck on thinking we cannot move or we cannot change. So what did you study, and what was your job to that point?
Yeah, I studied business in college, and I worked with, as far as work, 401ks and retirement plans for a Wall Street firm on the East Coast. And they didn't have any offices in Colorado. So I said, I guess I have to resign and move out there. I couldn't let that stop me.
Well, I love that. I couldn't let that stop me. I think that's a great approach to life. And so were you always, of course, we know it's a giveaway, but it's the premise of the book that you did have a very tragic skydiving. Were you always, you just share you like triathlons and that kind of stuff. Was skydiving like extreme adventure sports something you always liked?
Well, I think I always liked challenging myself. I think it took a while to work into those types of sports or adventures, because when I grew up, I didn't grow up in a family that was, a family of skydivers or mountain climbers or anything like that. So I kind of learned that as I went. Really, it started, I guess, when I was talking to a friend of mine, and she recommended a book that she had read. She actually hiked the whole Appalachian Trail, which is Georgia to Maine. And that was kind of my first exposure to someone actually I knew that was going on some sort of adventure. And she recommended a book on mountain climbing. And I started reading that, and I got finished with that. I was like, well, that sounded interesting. So I got another book on mountain climbing, kept on reading. And I was like, wow, that seems something super challenging and maybe something I want to pursue. So it kind of started with triathlon. And I didn't know anybody who did triathlons. I kind of just figured it out. I started buying books and, read about it and figured out how to train. And, back then you would look in the back of a magazine for races because that was before kind of the internet era and signing up there. And kind of just first time I ever saw another person who did triathlon was the first race I ever did.
Oh,
So
wow.
I kind of did that for a couple of years. And I said, well, mountain climbing sounds super interesting and challenging. And why don't I try that? So when I moved out to Colorado, I took a 2-week course in the state of Washington in Canada to learn how to climb, and moved here and then kind of just jumped into climbing and figuring that out. And eventually that led to, skydiving down the line a year. So I think it's all about testing yourself.
Hmm.
And, I think there's a big difference between saying you can do something and actually doing it, right? Everyone likes to say they can accomplish this or that, and that's all good and wonderful. But until you actually put yourself to the test is really when you determine whether you can do it or not. Because I mean, skydiving is really, you see those parachutes in the air and they're coming down. You're like, can I do that? Or am I composed enough to, do everything you need to do to deploy your parachute, land it safely? Or would I, just, I guess, freak out and it'll be too nerve wracking. So I think that's sort of the attraction. Same thing with triathlon. It's like, well, can I finish a triathlon? Well, I don't know. You don't know until you actually put the training in and actually do it. So yeah, I think it's just challenging myself to see if I'm capable of doing something that is kind of goal oriented. And yeah, so I think it's all
Interesting.
about the challenge.
Yeah, I love that the concept of testing yourself. I'm a little bit like that myself. So actually, I have parachuting in my bucket list. Of course, I probably, if I read your book, I'm probably not gonna do it. But I did jump out of the tallest tower in New Zealand, which was 600 feet. So it's quite high. But yeah, I do have the love for thrills and for testing myself. So, but then it's obviously you push yourself, you test yourself, there's some danger in what you're testing yourself about. Then one day came and you made the jump, and I want to move faster than I do in other episodes into this particular experience, because we're here to talk about the book and about
Sure.
how you're inspiring others through obviously probably one of the most difficult trying times of your life. So tell
Sure.
us a little bit about that day that changed the course of your life,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
So by that time I had been skydiving for a couple of years. So I was an experienced skydiver and so I had a couple hundred jumps under my belt. On that day was the third jump of the particular day. So I'm coming in for a landing, about to land on a field I had landed on hundreds of times before, grass field. And then I'm about 150 feet off the ground, and a huge wind comes off the mountains and picks me up and slams me forward. So I'm jostled, and I've never been hit by a wind that hard before from
Mm,
behind. So it was kind of disorienting at first, and then you kind of try to relax and figure out what you're going to do. So when you're at 150 feet off the ground, you really can't turn, because turning, the way a parachute turns is you pull one side, it collapses a little bit, the parachute, and then your parachute dives towards the ground, and then that creates a turn. Now, if you're 2,000 feet above the ground and you lose 200 feet, no big deal. You're way above the ground. But when you're at 150 feet and you try to do that, you will dive directly in the
mm,
ground and you're going to die.
mm,
So as that wind blew me, I all of a sudden see the grass below my feet, but there's a building and a fence in front of me, a cattle fence, like wire
mm,
fence.
mm,
So because of the increased speed from the wind behind me, I was like, well, I'm not sure 100% if I'm going to land before that fence
mm,
onto the field and I'll be okay, or this wind pushed me too hard and I'm going to hit this fence and hit this airplane hangar, which is big metal building,
mm,
and there's a big row of these metal buildings, and you have about 5 seconds from 150 feet off the ground, so you're counting down. So it's really quick. 5 seconds goes pretty quickly.
mhm,
And because I couldn't turn away from these buildings or fence, because that would have meant I would have dove directly into the ground and it wouldn't have survived, I basically just had to take a deep breath and say, whatever is going to happen is going to happen. I may land before this fence, I may not. And you're kind of counting down those 5 seconds. And then with about a second left, I said, there's no way I'm landing before this fence. I'm about to hit it.
mhm,
And you're just like, well, life's about to change. Uh,
mm,
and so I hit the fence. It comes tight around my chest and my abdomen. It breaks almost immediately. I'm hit up because I'm going 25, 30 miles an hour with that increased speed from the wind behind. The airplane hangar is about 10 feet behind that fence. So it's like hit the fence, breaks through. Almost immediately, I hit the metal building. and I black out from all the injuries. Essentially what happened was the main injury, I hit so hard on my left side, 10 of my 12 ribs break. It impacts my heart, and my heart shoots from the left side of my chest to the right side of my chest.
Mm.
And then it's 20 broken bones. 3 other organs are broken and need to be fixed. But I'm laying on that ground. First person that comes up to me, and mind you, I'm blacked out. I hit so hard, my body just shut down. They're trying to check on me. And I say, when they ask, how am I doing? I say, I was like, don't call anyone. I'll be okay. Just give me a minute. Now I was completely blacked out. That was the default setting that came out of my mouth. Because anytime you're hurt, you want to be okay, right? So you want to be able to stand up. Because if you stand up, then, it's not that bad. There's no way I'm standing up, and I didn't stand up for another 3 months after that. But it was like my body was defaulted into fight mode. It's kind of that fight or flight mode. Wasn't sure what was wrong, but I had been through battles in my life in the mountains and all these other things in life, situations where survival wasn't assured. And my body just knew how to kick in and start fighting. And that's what it did to survive. They called a flight for life helicopter. Helicopter me down 50 miles to the nearest level 1 trauma center that takes care of the worst of the worst accidents. They moved my heart from the right side back to the left side. Doctors were later said to my family they couldn't believe I survived because that's the first time they had ever performed that surgery on anyone. And they always deal with the worst of the worst type accidents. So they have, experience with these types of things, because they say people with injuries like he has don't survive it to make it in the hospital, let alone the surgery. They said, he should have never made it off that field alive, let alone be helicoptered alive and make it through the surgery. They were so not even convinced that they fixed it that they left my chest open for 3 days before they closed me up, just in case they needed to get in quickly again to fix it. So they induced me into a coma. I was in the coma for 8 days. After 3 days, they were convinced the heart was fixed. So they sewed that up and started fixing the rest of my body. I mean, my lungs were collapsed and spleen was lacerated. I had 20 broken bones. So I was kind of just destroyed. My body just detonated on impact because I hit that building so hard. And from there, I kind of wake up from the coma. And because I blacked out during the crash, I really didn't even know what was wrong with me when I woke up, because I knew something was horribly wrong. The coma was a horrible place to be in those 8 days, because my mind was racing the whole time. So it's like dream after dream after dream, or nightmare more like. And they're all kind of similar theme where, I was in really bad shape. I knew that in the dream, and people were there and they refused to help me. They were just leaving me for dead. And that made a decision. Like, did I believe that no one wanted to help me or care about me or want to fix me? Because on the outside, everyone was fixing me, but you're in your own sort of mind game within that coma. It becomes your reality because you don't have any other reality outside of that nightmare. Normally in a normal life situation, you could wake up from it and shake off a nightmare as just that, a nightmare. But when you can't wake up because you're in that coma, it is your reality. So you start believing all those negative thoughts and things given to you. To me, they were trying to make me give up and say, because no one would have known I gave up in that coma and just let myself die except me. And I was just like, after a while, you just get angry with all that negative self-talk, almost not self-talk, but in those nightmares. And I was starting to fight back. I was kind of really low and started building myself back up. It's like every time I overcame one of those nightmares, I became stronger instead of weaker. Until I just said, I'm ready to get out of this place. And I woke up and opened my eyes to a doctor leaning over me and saying, "You're lucky to be alive." That's how I was woken up from the coma.
Wow. Well, I thank you for that because you hear a lot of times people say, well, and then the person was fighting between death and life, but it's hard to touch it. But I think you've done a great job at explaining like how somehow some part of your subconscious was there and they're testing your limits in a way because everybody's giving up on you. And I know because my dad had also a life and death experience. And he says in the same state that you were, that he heard the doctor complaining because they called him at 3 a.m. in the morning and say, but you wake me up to come fix cadavers. Like he basically was starting the surgery knowing that there was no chance. And my dad was half away asleep and said, if you want, I want. And he said, and he puts it like that limit that you just described, like, don't give up on me. Like, I'm still here. I might not be talking, but that means that you have a very strong will. And I know that in your book, you, of course, bring spirituality. Now, were you a very spiritual person up to that point? Did you have God in a way to kind of give you strength? Share a little bit, if you will, about that part.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the church. So I already had, like, I would say the foundation of what allowed me to survive was built before I ever had to survive. People were put in my life, and God was put in my life to guide me through it. So I unknowingly, I would say, like, unknowingly was training for this trial or this accident to go through well before I ever did. I didn't realize that I was training for this upcoming accident or whatever was going to come. But luckily, I all the tools I used to survive were built well before that accident ever happened. So when I woke up from the accident, or I mean, even fighting through that coma, I kind of defaulted to things I knew how to do. And that brought me through all those tough times. I didn't have to try to imagine how to get through it. It was just all these lessons that had built up from childhood, from young adulthood to get me through those. So all those lessons were already there. So I would say, like, a strong foundation will guide you through the storm that you're living through right now. When you have built those lessons and went through difficult times, you'll be prepared to go through difficult times. I'd say, living through a difficult time only prepares you to get through more difficult times, right? If you go through one thing, tough, difficult thing in your life, or got through it, that it doesn't mean you're not going to go through other things. It just prepares you. And, as you go through other things after that difficult time, you're like, yeah, well, it's not so bad. I've been through worse. So yeah, faith was a huge part of recovery and battling through it for sure. But yeah, I was lucky I had all that before I ever got in the accident, because I'm not sure where I would have been unless I learned and built that foundation of, religion and, long days in the mountains and all these other adventures, got me through this more difficult situation. It was kind of prepared me for it.
Yeah, I always emphasize that, because it's almost like we go to the gym, we go to university, like we prepare ourselves in so many fronts, and many times that part of spirituality, call it whatever, religion, whatever it is, not even has to be a religion, but a spiritual practice is such an important aspect of, I think, as human beings, what we need to go through, because those are tools in your toolbox because you were, an experienced skydiver. It's not like, oh, well, yeah, he did a jump and it went wrong. And like, it happens even when people think it cannot happen. Like I've done, like, you drive a car every day. It can be the day that, you get in a bad car accident. So you never know when we're going to call upon that toolbox to help us get through.
Yeah. I always say, when something goes wrong, the time to, whatever your spiritual relationship, I'm Christian, but the time when something goes wrong is not when you start that practice. It's like, it works a lot better when you already have that relationship with God, or whatever your spiritual practice is, before you ever go through it. Trying to figure that on the fly. I didn't have to figure that out on the fly when something went wrong. I already had that, and it was there for me when I needed it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very powerful. And I will add, in my personal journey, when I've had those tribulations, that having had that tragedies happen sometimes is what has kept me going, because I always feel like I don't want to be the person that only calls upon the faith or the whatever when something goes bad. Like, you have to be even more active when everything is good. And then, appreciative of that, because I'm sure that whatever else you were going through in your life seems so small compared to like this trial. Like, these are the tests where you say, oh, and I'm complaining about my car being broken or these other things being broken. And then you face these kind of challenges and you realize, that we complain about a lot of small stuff.
Yeah. But it is, a true test of faith at that point. It's like, do I have faith that this happened for a reason? Why would I crash in this building? And then why did I get to live, right? Because they're telling me from the time I woke up, you shouldn't be alive. And you're like, well, there must be a reason that I got to live. And then what do you do with that? And that's the most important thing. It's easy to have faith when everything is going right. But when everything is going wrong and you're like, well, why did all this happen? Why? And early on, even when I woke up, I was like, all this happened for a reason. There's no reason I should have lived and gone through all of this. It's like I had to go through the toughest thing in my own life before I could understand how other people go through the toughest thing in their life to help them going through what they're going through, which I found out, kind of in my journey, that was my purpose, to help other people going through the toughest time in their life. Because I couldn't have understood it unless I went through it myself and come out of it. So
that's powerful. So finding calling through tragedy. And I know, so when of course in your book you explain a lot of the your own tests that you had to go through, like doctors telling you you're not going to walk or you're not going to do this. And so when you decide, how long after, I mean, I don't want to mix between your recovery, because it's a lot of what's on your book, like your let's say learning points and things that you share now as a motivational speaker. And for anybody, I mean, your book, it's incredible, very inspirational. So by the time you decide to let me do something with this and I'm going to become a motivational speaker, what prompted you to, or how did you get started on writing your own book?
Yeah. Well, at first I thought I was just going to go and speak to different audiences, whether it was church or youth groups and things like that, to talk about what I was going through. I had no intention of writing a book, because people would say, well, why don't you write a book about this? And I just, if it was just about me, I wasn't really interested in just talking about what happened. So I finish a speaking engagement, and then a gentleman comes up to me afterwards and he says, my friend's going through opioid addiction. And I think some of the things that you talked about today could really help them in their recovery, because they're in a really bad place. And they said, do you have anything that you could give me with your message out there? And this is the very beginning. I think it was like the second or third time that I spoke. And unfortunately, at that point, I said, I don't really have anything. Nothing's been recorded yet. This is only the third time I've done this. So, I gave him my number. I offered I would go to that person's house if they wanted to. And apparently they wouldn't let you in the house, the addiction they were kind of going through. So I drove home that day. My whole point of speaking was to help other people. If the message and the things I used to survive, if I couldn't pass it on to anything else, it was like what I went through was a waste. So as I'm driving home, I was like, well, maybe I'm missing out on a lot of the people that I could potentially be helping if all I'm doing is speaking, because speaking is limited to only the people that might be there on that particular day. I said, well, if I wrote this down, I could have handed that guy a book and they could have had the same message to give to their friend, and they could have read it in the time they wanted to, when it was convenient, or they were in the right mental space to be able to absorb maybe some of the message, and they could go back whenever they wanted to read it. So at that point, I said, wow, maybe the responsibility, or maybe the focus, speaking is one part, but if I don't write it down, then I'm missing the people I should be helping. So at that point, I went home and said, all right, well, I guess that means I have to write this story down. So, within days, I just sat down and started writing it out, and with that message of hope and helping other people, because now I guess I had a greater reason to write it. And that was the reason I wrote it, because it was to help other people. It wasn't for me or glorifying what I did, because who cares about that? But helping other people is that, okay, now this is worth the effort of going through this and figuring this out.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very powerful. And I know, you've been on TV shows, you've been on many podcasts, and I think the title of your book is great, A Day Till Sunrise. It's just gives you a little bit of the darkness to, the light. What is it that you think is, like the thing that you're most proud of? I know you give a little bit of like goldens of wisdom or nuggets of wisdom, and you say testing yourself is something I know. Like, what do you say if you had to pinpoint a few of the things that really got you through it? What would you say they were?
Well, to get through it, I would say, one, not accepting people's predictions of what's going to happen to you. When I was in the hospital, one, they didn't think I was going to live. And then early on, when I'm in the rehab hospital, I realized they didn't ask me what my goals were before I got out of that hospital. And by that second or third day, I was like, well, maybe they made up goals of their own for me. And I said, well, my goal, so my therapist walked in that following day, I said, my goal is to walk out of here on the last day of this rehab. And they looked at me like with this crazy look, like, walk. I'm like, we're preparing you to go home in a wheelchair. I was like, okay. And I got quiet and said, I'll do whatever exercise they want me to do, but I'm walking out of here. They just don't know what's about to hit them, because they didn't know what the lengths I was willing to go to walk out of there. And if I listened to them, I would have stayed in that wheelchair, because I would have said, it's not possible. And I was finding every day a way to make it possible by not only doing whatever exercises they wanted me to do, but going back to my room and doing as many exercises as possible, things I would just make up. Then when I was cleared to walk for the first time, the first question I asked the doctor, I was like, well, how much longer before I can run again? And the doctor kind of didn't even know what to say to me. He just kind of took away his words out of his mouth. And he said, run again. I said, yeah, well, what I'm assuming I'm going to run again. And they didn't realize I already had the goal of to do a race, a triathlon, because I had shared that with no one up until that point. Because I said I was going to triathlon a week after waking up from that coma. I just kept it to myself and I said, this is the goal. And if I listened to that doctor, maybe I would never run again. But I was just like, no, that's not part of my plan. So really, people, I think, unknowingly say things to you. To me, I was completely motivated by the fact that they said I wouldn't do it. I was like, well, I'm going to show them what I can do. But, there's so many outcomes that could occur in these accidents. These doctors see thousands of cases. And there's the 1% that recovers, and maybe there's the 1% that never recovers, and there's lots of people in the middle. But don't let people tell you what your limits are. You have to go out and find out what your limits are. And the only way to do that is to test yourself. And I think one of the other huge things is just finding a way to get a little bit better each day. Because I was laying in that bed and I was completely broken. 10 weeks I couldn't move. And I'm just like, you're starting to doubt yourself. You're like, how am I going to get better when I can't even move? Because I always feel better if I'm doing something towards solving a problem, which I felt like I couldn't do at that point. And then I was like, there's no way you're just going to jump out of bed one day. You're completely destroyed. And then I gave myself permission just to find a way to get a little bit better every day. And then that became something I was like, yeah, I could find something to do, even in this completely broken state and not be able to move, to get better each day. And that's going to create momentum. So when I eventually can start moving my legs and my arms and things like that, I was already going to be ahead of the game. So it really started with really mental training of revisiting journeys I had been on in the past and realizing you're going to start in one place and your goal is way off in the distance. And it was about little by little, week by week, finding a way to get better to eventually get to that goal. And that's when really things started to change, when I said, okay, I could find a way, or the pain was ravaging my body. I was like, I need to get this pain under control, not through drugs, but through my mind to start to get better, because I realized that was going to hold me back. So when I started to say, just find something each day to get a little bit better, when you all of a sudden 30 days or 60 days or 90 days later, that little improvement you make every single day, even though it might be unnoticeable at the time, it adds up and compounds. And all of a sudden, 90 days later, you're like, look where I am now versus, and it was only because you decided every day to find something to get slightly better. And I think testing yourself is important as well. One of the things I did when I got home from the hospital, I could barely walk. I was on crutches, and my endurance was really low after being in that bed for 3.5 months in the hospital. And so one day I go out, I walk this little loop or trail just to see if I could do it. And it was way further than I ever had walked before. I didn't know what was going to happen. My pelvis, which was broken in multiple places, and my leg was broken. It hurt unbelievably bad and I was like, man, maybe I shouldn't have walked so far today. Maybe that was a bad idea. But then that set in motion the test every week. So then every week I would test myself under that same trail. So it all of a sudden it went from, crutches to one crutch to a cane to walking without a crutch to then eventually running that path. And each time it was a way of seeing what was my progress. There was a definite way of saying, well, I'm faster this week, or I'm slower this week, or where I am. And then you adjust what you're doing to meet your goal. Maybe those adjustments you made the last week didn't create a huge benefit, or, something you changed a week before made a huge difference. And maybe you need to keep on doing that. But when you're testing yourself, there's possibly you're going to fail, right? You're going to get slower one week, and that can get you depressed, or that can say, okay, what I'm doing, I need to change it up a little bit, but it's black and white. And that's what I liked about that clock that I would have on my wrist and that watch. Say either I'm faster or I'm not. There's no lying. There's no like, maybe I'm better, maybe I'm not. It's like either you're better or you're not, and let's go from here. So sometimes it doesn't feel great to fail, but failing can also provide you the ultimate success or ultimate way you need to go to get to where you want. And if you're not willing to fail, then you're less likely to get to the goal where you want to be.
Mm. Wow, that's very inspirational, and I really think that what you mentioned about the mental training and the importance of where your mind is at. I think that's where most people challenge. That's the biggest challenge is when you hear somebody that says, "Well, I've had somebody in this podcast that has beaten cancer 5 times," and when you hear him speak, it's pretty similar to what you're saying. It's like, yeah, I know this is against the odds, but I'm been doing this and that. I beat cancer the first time, and then and he learned to live with certain circumstances, but his mind has never given up or surrender. He's always like, well, I can beat this and I can go, and that way he's been testing himself, and thank God he's still doing good. So that mental training is so critical. Any advice on the book as to how do you train your mind to do that?
Yeah, I would say luckily that I had been through, training for triathlons and mountain climbing and all those things, and had been in situations where, the results, in mountains, surviving night sub-zero temperatures without sleeping bags or tents or anything like that, where you're in this situation for the first time. And like I was in that accident for the first time, right? I had no reference to go off. I had never been in the hospital for, I had never been broken like that before, but I'd been through hard things before that. So I was like, well, you overcame that difficult time before. So you're going to get through this difficult time now because there's some similarity of how you got through that last challenge, even though it was completely different from this one to this one. So I think it's positivity, or having a goal, is incredibly important, because I think one of the difficult things in terms of rehab was people would ask you how you're doing or how you are. And it's so depends on the day, depends on you feel. To me, there was no kind of black and white. And that's why early on, even waking after that coma, I knew how my brain worked. And I said, I need to set a goal that has a finite answer. Either you pass or you fail. And that's why I chose a triathlon, because I did it before. And because choosing a triathlon as my goal was either you finish or you don't finish. You finish in the time limit or you don't. It's a swim, bike, and a run. There's no, I wasn't looking for any special exceptions or special for time, even though I'm hurt. I was just like, this is the goal. This is what I want to do. And that will mean my legs work, my upper body works, my heart works again. So it tested my entire body. And that's what I came up with. So I think having that ultimate goal is really important to strive for. So every day when I'm trying to get better, it wasn't getting better and where was that going to leave me? It was like everything is building towards this triathlon. That's why I'm going to get better today. And that would get me up. Because otherwise, if you're just like, well, I want to move my wrist a little bit better than it was yesterday. It's like, well, how many days in a row is that going to work? Because what does that even mean? How do you measure that? But the triathlon was completely measurable. And that made sense in my mind, because you get an answer at the end. Either you failed or you didn't. And maybe you failed, and it's like, well, sign up for another triathlon and find out why you failed and get better, get better so you can do it again. So I think having that measurement is really important. Otherwise, because I also say, well, how much rehab are you going to do, or when do you stop? Because there's no one tells you like, oh, you're done with rehab, or that you've done enough, or things like that. It's like, I'm going to decide when rehab is done. And that's going to lead me to racing. Or I say, I'm still doing rehab, I guess, in some mental way, even though I'm not going to physical therapists. I'm always trying to get better. So I guess I was always doing some sort of therapy in my life. It was always a goal to get better no matter what I was doing, even outside of the accident.
I can see that. Now, are you still jumping out of planes?
I'm not. My family. So even when I was laying in that bed and not able to move, they would come to bed and say, because they know how my mind works, they're like, can you please not jump ever again? And, one of the things that with the accident is that there was a tremendous amount of guilt that I had to go through. And really that 10 weeks after waking up from the coma was the toughest thing I had ever gone through mentally. because you lay there, you can't move. I would say I had all these coping mechanisms that I used to use when I was stressed before. You'd go out for a run, or, you jump out of a plane a couple times on a Saturday. And it took away, laying in that bed, all those coping mechanisms that I used to kind of avoid or get through life. And you had to lay there and think about your entire life. And I never thought about kind of the good things, because there's lots of good things happen in my life, and there's lots of things I'm proud of in my life. But I never thought of any of that. All I thought of the things that I wasn't good at, and the things I missed out on, and the things I wish I did better before that accident, and things I was missing. And when you're laying there and you continually beating yourself up for those 10 weeks, and like, it was really hard to go through, because you're like, man, I could have died, and I would have left things. I didn't say I loved you enough to people that I cared about. Maybe I didn't spend enough time, because I was always going 100 miles an hour and missing out on important things in life that I wish I didn't. And luckily I get that second chance to correct that. But one of the also things, going back to really feeling the guilt, was also that 10 weeks, and it went beyond that. But I'm laying there, and luckily my parents were retired. They live on the East Coast. They come out there, and they were there every single day, the entire time I was in the hospital, and afterwards as well. But I'm laying there. I'm just like, I'm here because I made the decision to jump out of that plane. They didn't make that decision. Mm-hmm. And I put them through, and them and the rest of my family and friends and things like that. Something I can't even 100% understand, how much pain and what I put them through that accident, because it's my fault. You could say, well, the wind blew you and this and that, but ultimately I jumped out of the plane all those times, and I got hurt. And because I jumped out of the plane, I got hurt. I can't imagine what it must have been like for my family to walk in for the first time and see me in that coma, wondering if I was going to live, or what it must have felt like for them to call my siblings and my family and tell them, Jason's been in a horrible accident and he might not survive. That's not a fun place to be. And it was my fault. And they never put any of that on me. They said, it's an accident. We understand that, but that doesn't take away the responsibility that I bear for putting them through that. Mm-hmm. So that's, that's sort of the downside, I guess, of some of these adventures, that something can go wrong. But there's lots of things that went right. Yeah. There's lots of things that have gone right over the years in adventures, and there's a lot of near misses that have happened over the years. But I'd say the skydiving crash is the best thing that has ever happened to me, because it really allowed me to refocus my life. And I felt like I had really lost purpose before that accident. I was really working a lot of hours for lots of years on end, and I really wasn't happy. It's like that skydiving crash came at the right time for me to live through that, and then reassess my life and say, well, what's my purpose? What came out of this? What do you do with all of what happened? Because you're lucky to be alive. You need to do something with this. And I was lucky to live and be able to help other people that are going through other tough times through their own lives.
Well, Jason, I thank you, because it's you've shared a lot of stuff that I can tell it, of course, was a very difficult time for you, and to have to relieve some of that feelings, it takes courage. And I know that anybody, my own mom has just lived by terrible fractures after fractures. So I know I'll be telling her to listen to your episode, because there's so many people we know on a daily basis that have to deal with situations like that, when they think they can come back from something. And you are living example that not only you can come back, but as I think I get from you, it's like you can come back even better, because then you come back with a different outlook on life. So I always give my guests an opportunity. Is there anything that you're working on that you want to share besides your book, your speaking engagements, anything that is exciting? I will share your webpage with the audience, and a place where they can buy your book. Anything else you want to share at this point?
Yeah, one of the things that this year was great that I came back from was the first time I was climbing mountains again. Doctors didn't bother predicting whether I'd be able to climb a mountain again. They didn't think I was going to be able to run. So I did that, and partially is that I have this holiday I do every year called Coming Back to Life Day, where I celebrate that day I almost died, and really think about that day again and try to overcome something that someone said I wouldn't be able to do. And that was no different this year, because it's the 5-year anniversary. This coming week, I'm doing another triathlon. started to, decide to do that again
Amazing.
my body's working well. And so I wanted to jump in. But besides that, coming up in the fall, some more book signings, some more speaking engagements. But I think the most important thing is having people understand that they are far stronger than they think they are. Oftentimes we give other people credit for having strength or being able to do something that we can't do, when the reality is the lessons we have learned in life and the strength we have inside will bring you and get you through obstacles you couldn't possibly thought you would have gone through before. And sometimes these unexpected things come in our life, these difficulties that really test us. And I think people need to give themselves credit. You are strong, and it'll get you through that obstacle that you're going through, that oftentimes people don't give themselves enough credit for.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I would take it. I mean, it might be repetitive because you say triathlon, but I also love to ask anything else that you do to connect you to what makes you tick. Maybe when you were in that bed that you couldn't do many of the things that makes you tick, obviously. Any other thing that gives you that strength, inner strength to keep going?
Yeah, it's kind of, I always feel like I'm running out of time in life, and there's always so many things to accomplish. And I think you have to be careful not to let things overtake your life, and you have to take a look at what things are important in your life and make sure that you tend to those things that are most important in your life, whether it's your family and your friends and your purpose of why you're on earth. But yeah, so it's that constant, I feel like I'm running out of time. I better get going on whatever I need to accomplish and to do, because life, you're only going to be on earth for so long, and you can't put things off. You have to keep on going. And so I guess that was just the philosophy of waking up, and I need to find a way to get to where I want to be. And I'll probably never get to exactly where I want to be, but that's having those goals always ahead of you is what keeps on driving you forward to keep on doing those things every day that might be uncomfortable or might be difficult. People are going to tell you no when you try to go to a speaking engagement and try to book something, and every single person might not pick up your book the first time when you kind of pitch them on what it's about, but it's about pushing past that, because if you give up at first, then maybe your purpose is never going to happen. Or you're never going to be able to come to fruition. But it's like, no, just fuels you to find a yes, to get to where you want to go. So when you have a purpose, it'll drive you to places that you wouldn't have gone to unless you had that purpose that you feel important, that's going to drive your life and help other people. So I think having a purpose in life makes you easier to wake up in the morning. It helps you, overcome or go through things you wouldn't ordinarily have gone through, but that purpose keeps driving you forward. And hopefully that, that purpose of helping other people going through difficult times really has pushed me to find new skills and new things that I wasn't sure I knew how to do before. And you keep on trying to figure out. I never had written a book before. I never marketed a book before. And those aren't skills in my background, but you figure it out because you have a purpose to help other people. So, if you don't figure out those skills, you're not going to connect with people that you want to connect with to help them out.
Well, you are as inspirational as it gets, Jason. So I really compliment you, congratulate you for all you've done, and on your full recovery, and the fact that you are, resuming your life, or have resumed your life rather, as it was before. So definitely be on the lookout, and a big supporter of your work. And we thank you so much for being in Back to Basics today, sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me on and let me, spread my message of hope. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody out there. And I hope you're as inspired as I am after this episode of Back to Basics. Until the next time. Bye-bye. You've been listening to Back to Basics. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. If you haven't yet, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on Apple Podcast or any of your favorite streaming platforms. This is the best gift you can give us. Join me next week for another Back to Basics conversation. And if you want to find out about other exciting things I'm working on, visit leticialatino.com. Thank you, and until the next time.